In every forgotten corner of the world, abandoned places stand silent and still left to crumble and decay, but never truly empty. These desolate buildings and forsaken towns hold stories darker than the shadows themselves, secrets that refuse to die. Tonight, we venture into the eerie, the unsettling, and the downright terrifying. As we explore 12 true encounters from abandoned places where the line between the living and the lost blurs in the most chilling ways. From haunted hospitals to deserted amusement parks, each story you're about to hear is drawn from real experiences. True stories that will grip your imagination and haunt your thoughts long after the last word is spoken. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, these tales will pull you deep into the unknown, where fear is alive, lurking just beyond the crumbling walls. So, brace yourself and prepare to journey into darkness, because once you step inside these abandoned places, there's no turning back. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Farcical Fears and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a terrifying true story that will keep your nights restless and your curiosity alive. Now, let's uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows of these forgotten places. Let's move to our first story. They called it Briarwood State Hospital, though no one in town had said its name aloud in decades. The brick building loomed over the edge of Pine Hollow like a malignant tumor, its windows boarded, its gates rusted shut, and its roofline sagging under years of neglect. Most people saw it as a ruiner, forgotten shell left to rot after the state shut it down in the early 80s. But for those who had lived in Pine Hollow long enough, Briarwood wasn't just abandoned, it was dangerous. Not because of collapsing floors or jagged glass, but because of what still lingered inside. I wasn't supposed to be there. My plan was simple: photograph the hospital for a local history blog I was building, something that would pull in curious readers and maybe get me a little attention. I'd done this before. Old mills, defunct train stations, shuttered schools, but Briarwood was different. Even before I stepped through the fence, the air felt heavier, like the world had dimmed a few shades. The sound of the highway faded behind me, replaced by the low sigh of wind through skeletal trees. The main gate was chained, but the fence was bent inward near the maintenance road. I slipped through, my backpack catching on the rusted wire and tearing slightly. As I straightened up, I noticed something strange. No birdsong, no insect buzz, just silence, the kind that feels like it's listening back. Briarwood had been a psychiatric hospital, built in 1912, when the state decided to relocate the undesirables from overcrowded city asylums. It was supposed to be a place of recovery, with gardens, sunrooms, and open spaces. But by the 50s, its reputation had curdled. Overcrowding, underfunding, and rumors of experimental treatments turned it into a warehouse for the forgotten. When a fire in 1983 killed 22 patients in one locked ward, the state closed it for good. The front steps were littered with broken glass and leaves. The double doors were chained, but gapped enough to see inside a dark lobby littered with furniture, graffiti on the peeling walls. My flashlight beam cut a cone through the dust as I slipped in through a side door that had rotted away from its hinges. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not mold, not exactly something sweeter, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. My boots crunched over tile, and every step echoed far too loud in the empty halls. My plan was to hit the main wards first, then maybe the basement, if I had time. I told myself I wasn't spooked, but I kept glancing over my shoulder anyway. In Ward C, I found the old patient room's tiny cells with metal cots, some still bolted to the floor. The graffiti here was different. Most places I'd explored had cartoonish tags or crude jokes, but this was strange. Thin, jagged writing scratched directly into the plaster. Some were single words: "Listen, stay mother," and others were long spirals of text I couldn't read. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, until my breath puffed in front of me. At the far end of the hall, I found the fire door. The metal was warped from heat, blackened with soot. A faint smell of char still lingered after 40 years. I reached out without thinking, and the instant my fingers brushed the surface, a noise erupted behind me. Footsteps, not the casual scuff of an animal, or the creak of old wood, deliberate, heavy, and coming fast. I spun around, flashlight beam jerking wildly across the hall, but there was nothing. Just the peeling paint and the empty doorway. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I told myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it again closer. I backed into the fire door, my hand scraping the metal. The footsteps stopped. Then came a whisper. It wasn't words at first, more like the sound of someone breathing right in my ear. Then it formed. Go back. I froze. My skin crawled as the air seemed to press in on me from all sides. I bolted, my flashlight bouncing wildly, my boots slamming on tile. I didn't stop until I reached the main lobby. That's when I saw her. She stood at the base of the grand staircase, thin, pale, wearing what looked like a patient's gown. Her hair hung over her face, and her head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if her neck had been partially broken. I opened my mouth to speak, but she moved fast. Impossibly fast, darting up the stairs and vanishing into the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But something else pulled at me. I had my camera. I had proof. If I could just get one shot. I followed her. The second floor smelled worse, like mildew, and something coppery beneath it. My flashlight's beam landed on old gurneys, overturned wheelchairs, and a scattering of yellowed patient files. I kept my breathing slow, trying to listen for movement. Then I saw the door marked Ward F, restricted. It hung slightly open. The air spilling from it was freezing, colder than anything else in the building. Inside was a row of padded cells, their walls torn and shredded. And in the last cell on the right, something moved. It was her again, but now I could see her. Face, or what was left of it. Her eyes were sunken pits, her lips shredded, as if gnawed away. She pressed her hands to the small wired glass window in the cell door, and in a voice that was both whisper and scream, she said, "They never let us out." Before I could react, the cell door slammed shut so hard the walls shook. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute blackness. I fumbled for my backup light, but in the dark. The footsteps returned, dozens of them this time, surrounding me. Circling closer, something brushed my arm, cold, wet fingers, and I lost it. I ran, crashing through the hall, barely avoiding debris, my lungs burning. Somehow, I found the staircase and barreled down it 2 steps at a time. When I burst into the daylight outside, I didn't stop running until I reached the highway. I didn't even notice the deep scratches on my arm until hours later. 3 parallel lines, as if made by nails. I never went back to Brutterwood. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the whisper again. Always the same words. Go back. But go back wasn't just a whisper anymore. It started to show up in other ways. The first time was the next morning. I'd fallen asleep on my couch, still wearing my clothes from the night before, trying to convince myself that exhaustion had made me imagine everything. But when I woke up, my phone was lying on my chest, its flashlight still on. The battery was dead, but the strangest thing was the screen. Somehow, the camera app was open, and there were 23 new photos in my gallery. Every single one was pitch black, except for the last 3. Those had faint shapes in them, white blurry silhouettes, like the outlines of faces pressed too close to the lens. One face looked like it was screaming, another had empty eye sockets. The third was behind me. I deleted the photos immediately, but it didn't help. Over the next week, I started seeing Briarwood everywhere. Not the prison itself, just pieces of it. The reflection in the microwave glass would show. A hallway with peeling paint instead of my kitchen. The faint drip of water in my bathroom at night sounded exactly like the leaky pipes from the prison showers. Even my dreams took me back, always to the same cell, always with the same voice. And that voice, it was changing. The go back became longer, more desperate. It started saying things I couldn't fully make out, like someone trying to speak through water. I woke up one night with my pillowcase clenched so hard in my fist that my knuckles were bleeding. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I told myself that leaving it alone was the only way to end whatever this was. But then, my neighbor's kid went missing. 12 years old, vanished on his way back from a friend's house. The police searched everywhere, every road, every yard, nothing, until someone found his bike. It was lying on its side, in the dirt path that led into the forest. The same forest that surrounded Briarwood. That night, I didn't sleep. My brain wouldn't let me. The voice in my head wasn't just whispering anymore, it was screaming. Not angry, not threatening, just urgent. By the time the sun came up, I knew I was going back. Let's move to our second story, in the remote reaches of the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog clings tightly to ancient trees, and the silence is broken only by the whisper of the wind through the leaves, lies the forgotten town of Ravenswood. Once a bustling mining community in the late 1800s, Ravenswood was abandoned after a series of tragic accidents and mysterious disappearances left the residents fleeing in fear. Today, the crumbling ruins and twisted foundations remain, swallowed slowly by the relentless forest, but the echoes of its past still linger, and some say the town is far from empty. My story begins with Thomas, a seasoned hiker and amateur historian, who set out to explore the remnants of Ravenswood during a solo trip in early autumn. Thomas had heard the legends how the mines were cursed, how miners' spirits haunted the tunnels, and how those who ventured too far often didn't return. But for him, the thrill of discovery outweighed any tales of ghosts or curses. He carried with him a camera, a journal, and a heart full of skepticism. On the first day, Thomas made his way through dense thickets and overgrown paths, documenting the weathered cabins and rusted mining equipment half buried in moss. The air was heavy with a strange stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As dusk settled, he set up camp near the remains of the old Ravenswood schoolhouse. The night was eerily quiet, except for the distant howl of an animal and the occasional creak of dying trees. It was then that Thomas first heard the faint sound of a whistle, soft, mournful, and impossibly distant. Curious, he followed the sound deeper into the woods, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The whistle grew louder, more insistent, leading him to the mouth of an abandoned mine shaft, sealed decades ago. The air around the entrance was cold, unnaturally so, and Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Against his better judgment, he squeezed through a narrow gap in the rocks and stepped inside. The mine was a labyrinth of tunnels, their walls slick with moisture and echoing with the drip of water. His flashlight revealed faded miners' marks on the timber supports and discarded tools rusting in the dirt. But soon, the whistle ceased, replaced by a low rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from all directions. Thomas pressed on, the sound growing into a deafening pounding that rattled the very walls suddenly. His flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into total darkness. Panic surged through him as unseen hands seemed to brush his skin, cold and clammy, dragging at his jacket. He scrambled blindly, desperate for the exit, heart hammering as the pounding transformed into guttural whispers chanting a language he could not understand. When the light finally returned, Thomas found himself at the edge of a cavern where ghostly figures flickered in and out of sight, miners trapped between worlds, their hollow eyes pleading for release. One stepped forward, extending a sooty hand, whispering, "Don't follow us." Before Thomas could react, the ground trembled, and a roar echoed through the tunnels as the earth began to collapse. He fled, bursting from the mine's mouth into the cold night air, gasping and shaken. For days afterward, Thomas was plagued by nightmares filled with the miners' faces and that haunting whistle. He returned home but felt an inexplicable pull, a shadow that followed him in every silent moment. Some say Ravenswood still calls to those who listen, its lost souls trapped beneath the mountains, waiting for company. Thomas never returned, but his last journal entry ended with a warning. The past is buried here, but it is not silent. If you hear the whistle, don't answer. Some say Ravenswood still calls to those who listen, its lost souls trapped beneath the mountains, waiting for company. Thomas never returned, but his last journal entry ended with a warning. The past is buried here, but it is not silent. If you hear the whistle, don't answer. After that final entry, Thomas's friends and family grew increasingly worried. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages left on his voicemail remained unopened. Weeks passed, and no one heard from him. His belongings were found abandoned in his small cabin-packed backpack. Camera gear, and his journal, opened to that haunting final page. The pages beyond that last sentence were smeared with what looked like dirt, or something darker, making the words nearly illegible. It wasn't long before search parties were organized, but the dense forest and rugged terrain around Ravenswood made the task nearly impossible. The mountains seemed to swallow sound and scent alike, confusing even the most experienced trackers. Those who joined the search reported strange sensations: cold spots, sudden chills, and faint eerie sounds like distant hammering or soft, despairing whispers carried on the wind. Some volunteers refused to go further after sunset, claiming that shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, and that the forest itself seemed alive with unseen eyes. They spoke of figures glimpsed at the edges of their vision, pale men in ragged clothes, faces obscured by grime and age, standing motionless among the trees, watching. Months later, a small group of hikers stumbled upon Thomas's camera. Near the mouth of the mine, the camera's battery was dead, but the SD card was intact. When viewed on a laptop, the footage was chilling, a mix of daytime exploration, eerie nighttime captures, and frantic scenes near the end, where the camera shook violently, as if the operator was running or struggling. One clip showed the entrance of the mine at dusk, with the whistle echoing softly in the background. In another, shadowy figures flickered just beyond the flashlight's beam, barely visible but unmistakably human in shape. The final videos were more disturbing: sudden bursts of static, the sound of breathing heavily, and whispered voices in a language unknown, punctuated by a terrified gasp. What happened to Thomas after the footage ends remains a mystery. Locals say his spirit is now part of Ravenswood's tortured history, another soul, ensnared in the mountain's ancient curse. The mine, once a source of livelihood, became a tomb, a gateway where the living and dead blur. The legend warns that those who enter the mines at night risk never leaving, drawn into an eternal darkness from which there is no return. Years later, some adventurers claim to have heard the same mournful whistle near Ravenswood. Some say it's a call for help. Others believe it's a warning to stay away. But for those brave or foolish enough to explore, the mountains keep their secrets close, and the past refuses to stay buried. Years passed, but the story of Thomas and Ravenswood haunted those who knew it. His disappearance became a cautionary tale whispered at campfires and in dimly lit bars. But for me, hearing the story for the first time, it was more than a ghost tale. It felt like a puzzle begging to be solved. I decided to follow in Thomas's footsteps, retracing his journey to Ravenswood, armed with his journal and a stubborn need to understand what had taken him. The deeper I ventured into the mountains, the more I felt an oppressive weight pressing down, like the forest itself was conspiring to keep its secrets at the edge of Ravenswood. The skeletal remains of the mining town were swallowed by creeping vines and twisted roots. Foundations crumbled beneath thick moss, and rusted tools lay scattered in wild gardens reclaimed by nature. The silence was profound: no birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a heavy stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I set up camp near the entrance to the infamous mine. Night descended like a velvet curtain, and as darkness folded around me, the wind began to carry the faintest notes of that whistle, the same mournful call Thomas described. My blood ran cold. Determined to press on, I edged toward the mines, gaping mouth. The cold air spilled from the shaft, like a breath from the earth itself, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Inside, the walls closed in with a suffocating weight. My flashlights flickered as I descended, each step echoing through the labyrinth of tunnels. The tapping noises began again, low, deliberate, then faster, as if footsteps approached and receded, never quite visible. I stumbled upon faded carvings, etched into the timbers, names, dates, and strange symbols, some resembling broken crosses or distorted faces. The atmosphere thickened with an unshakable dread, and a whispered chant began to rise around me, unintelligible but filled with sorrow and rage. Suddenly, a cold hand grazed my shoulder. I spun around, but the tunnel was empty. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows began to move, figures stepping out of the darkness, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow, their mouths opening in silent screams. Panic surged, and I fled, the path twisting unnaturally, leading me deeper rather than out. The whistle morphed into a chorus of voices, pleading, warning, condemning. As I broke into the moonlit forest outside, I felt their gaze burn into my back. Back at my camp, I pored over Thomas's journal and my own recordings. The mine's curse was no mere legend. It was a place where time twisted, souls trapped between worlds, where those who entered risked becoming echoes themselves. I left Ravenswood with more questions than answers, haunted not just by what I'd seen but by the whispering promise. Some places are forgotten for a reason, and the dead do not rest easy. Let's move to our third story. Deep in the heart of Appalachia, hidden beneath the dense canopy of ancient oaks and maples, lies a place locals only refer to as the Hollow. It's an abandoned logging camp, swallowed by time and the relentless forest, where the air is thick with silence and the scent of damp earth. Once a bustling site for timber extraction during the early 1900s, the Hollow is now nothing more than a collection of rotting cabins, rusted machinery, and scattered tools. But its history is stained with something far darker than decay. My name is Emily, and I first heard whispers of the Hollow when I was researching Appalachian folklore. Stories spoke of a logging crew that vanished without a trace, leaving behind only chilling signs of struggle and terror. Unlike many ghost stories, these accounts came from the journals and letters of those who lived nearby. Their words tinged with genuine fear, compelled by a mix of skepticism and fascination. I decided to investigate for myself. The journey began on a cold, foggy morning, as I followed a narrow, overgrown path leading into the forest. Every step seemed to draw me deeper into a world forgotten by time. As I neared the Hollow, the trees grew denser, their branches intertwining like gnarled fingers blocking the weak sunlight. The silence was oppressive. No birds sang, no animals stirred, just a heavy, watchful stillness. I reached the remnants of the camp by midday. The cabins were dilapidated, their wooden frames warped and cracked. Old tools lay scattered in the dirt, rusted chains hung limply from broken beams, and the skeletal remains of a steam-powered sawmill stood silent, frozen in time. But the most unsettling sight was a circle of stones arranged in the clearing, darkened by years of burnt wood and surrounded by strange symbols scratched into nearby trees. As I set up camp, I found an old, leather-bound journal hidden beneath a pile of debris in one of the cabins. The pages belonged to a man named Samuel, a logger who had worked at the Hollow shortly before the disappearance. His entries were filled with mundane details at first: weather reports, lumber quota spot. As the weeks passed, a creeping dread seeped into his words. He described hearing strange noises at night, whispers carried on the wind, distant footsteps that never seemed to get closer, and shadows flitting just beyond his vision. One entry spoke of a presence in the woods, something ancient and malevolent that watched the camp with cruel intent. Samuel wrote of a terrible fear that gripped the men, driving some to madness and others to flee. The final pages were nearly illegible, smeared with dirt and what looked disturbingly like blood. They ended abruptly with the chilling line, "It's here. We're not alone. Pray for us." That night, as darkness fell, I lay awake listening. The forest seemed to breathe around me, alive with unseen eyes. A sudden chill swept through the clearing, and I heard a low guttural growl reverberating through the trees. Heart pounding, I strained to catch the source, but nothing came into view. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, mournful wail that pierced the silence. Over the following days, strange occurrences intensified. My equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, batteries drained within minutes, and my compass spun wildly. At times, I glimpsed fleeting shapes among the trees, forms that vanished when I turned to look. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost tangible malevolence that seemed to press against my skin. One evening, drawn by a force I couldn't explain, I ventured toward the stone circle. As I stepped inside, the temperature plummeted, and the forest around me seemed to fall deathly silent. The symbols on the trees pulsed faintly in the moonlight, and a shadowy figure emerged at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and twisted, with eyes glowing like embers and limbs that moved with unnatural jerks. Frozen in terror, I watched as it began to chant in a voice that sounded like the grinding of stone and the whisper of dead leaves. The ground trembled beneath me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over my mind. The figure reached out, and a wave of darkness surged forward, threatening to engulf me, summoning every ounce of strength. I broke free and ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at my face and clothes. Behind me, the growls and chanting faded into the distance, but the terror lingered. When I finally burst into the dawn light, I knew the hollow had claimed another soul. To this day, I carry the weight of that encounter. The hollow is more than a forgotten logging camp. It is a place where ancient darkness festers, waiting patiently in the shadows for the next trespasser to stumble into its grasp. And I warn you now, should you ever hear the whispers of the hollow on the wind, don't listen, run. The days after my terrifying encounter felt like walking through a nightmare. I couldn't wake from the weight of the hollow's darkness pressed down on me, even after I'd left its haunted boundaries behind. Sleep was elusive. When I did close my eyes, the forest's sinister whispers invaded my dreams, gnarled hands reaching, eyes glowing. In the blackness, that terrible growl echoing endlessly. But despite the overwhelming fear, I was driven by a need to understand what I had experienced. What was this presence that had claimed the logging camp and nearly claimed me? I returned to the journal, poring over Samuel's final entries again and again, hoping for some clue. One passage stood out. There is a legend among the old-timers, a spirit born of the forest's rage, a creature that punishes those who take too much, who disrespect the land. They call it the Warden. It is not a ghost of a man, but something older, something primal. The Warden watches from the shadows, and when angered, it calls the lost into the darkness forever. The story matched everything I had felt, the relentless dread, the strange symbols marking the camp, the ancient stone circle. I realized that this wasn't just a haunted place. It was a trap set by something elemental. A guardian twisted by centuries of pain and vengeance, determined to uncover more. I reached out to locals who lived near the hollow, hoping their stories would shed light on the creature's origins. What I found was a tapestry of folklore, warnings passed down through generations. One elder woman told me about her grandfather, a woodsman who had barely escaped the hollow decades ago. She recounted how he described a great shadow stalking the forest, a force that twisted the minds of men and bent the forest to its will. Another shared an old Appalachian folktale of a forest spirit that demanded respect and sacrifice, punishing those who plundered without care. Yet another story spoke of a group of loggers who had tried to clear the forest with fire, only to find the flames extinguished by unnatural rain. After that, they vanished, one by one. These stories painted a chilling picture. The hollow wasn't just haunted by restless souls, but guarded by a vengeful spirit, born from the land itself. Haunted by these accounts, I returned to the hollow for a third time, this time equipped with more than just a flashlight and journal. I carried talismans gifted by a local herbalist, herbs believed to ward off evil, and a small wooden carving said to appease the forest spirits. As I stepped into the camp, an eerie stillness greeted me. The symbols glowed faintly again, as if alive, pulsing with the heartbeat of the forest. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of pine mixed with something rotten and ancient. That night, beneath a silver moon, the forest came alive in a way I had never witnessed. The shadows lengthened and danced, the wind carrying mournful howls and whispers. From the edge of the clearing, a silhouette emerged, the Warden. This time, the creature was clearer, monstrous, and majestic. Its form shifting between bark, shadow, and flame. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that chilled me to my core. I raised the wooden carving, whispering the old words the herbalist had taught me. For a moment, the Warden paused, a rumble shaking the earth. Then, slowly, it lowered its form and vanished into the trees, leaving a silence heavier than before. I fled the camp as dawn painted the sky, heart pounding with relief and fear. The hollow had spared me, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Since that night, I have warned anyone who dares listen. The hollow's darkness is ancient and powerful. It guards not just a logging camp, but a legacy of anger, pain, and death that will consume those who disrespect it. If you ever find yourself near those cursed woods and hear the low growl or the mournful whisper of the wind, heed the warning. Do not venture into the hollow. For once you step inside, the forest will not let you leave unchanged, or at all. Let's move to our fourth story. Tucked away in a remote valley of the Appalachian Mountains, there stands an abandoned sanatorium known as Blackwood Ridge. For decades, its decaying walls and rusted gates have been swallowed by ivy and shadow, a grim reminder of forgotten patients and darker secrets long buried beneath the peeling paint and shattered windows. The sanatorium once promised healing and hope to those struggling with mental illness. But what transpired behind its locked doors is a tale that locals rarely speak of, and when they do, it is in hushed, fearful tones. My name is David, and I first came across Blackwood Ridge during a research project on historic medical facilities in Appalachia. The more I dug into its past, the more I uncovered stories that chilled me to the bone, reports of mistreatment, inexplicable disappearances, and something far more sinister lurking within the hospital's depths. Drawn by a blend of professional curiosity and a personal fascination with the paranormal, I decided to visit Blackwood Ridge, hoping to piece together its dark history. Arriving on a gray autumn afternoon, the atmosphere was immediately oppressive. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and mold, and the building itself loomed like a specter amid the overgrown landscape. The gate hung loosely on its hinges, creaking softly in the breeze. I stepped inside, the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Inside, the corridors stretched out in endless shadows, the walls scarred by time and neglect. Rusted beds and broken medical equipment lay abandoned, coated in dust and spiderwebs. But what unsettled me most were the faded messages scrawled on the walls, cryptic words like help, they watch, and don't trust. Some were scratched into the plaster, others painted in what looked like dried blood. As I moved deeper into the sanatorium, I uncovered patient records revealing disturbing patterns. Many had been admitted for routine care, but vanished mysteriously. Their files marked transferred to secure facility, though no such place existed. Others reported hearing voices, seeing shadowy figures, and experiencing a creeping paranoia that drove them to madness. The records hinted at experiments, treatments so cruel they defied medical ethics conducted by a doctor whose name had been scrubbed from all official documentation. One night, as I explored the old therapy wing, I felt a cold draft brush past me, despite the sealed windows. A faint whisper echoed through the halls, indistinct but urgent. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, leading me to a small, locked room at the end of a long corridor. The door bore scratch marks and strange symbols etched into the wood. Inside, I found a journal belonging to a former nurse named Clara. Her entries described a growing fear among the staff, mysterious noises in the night, and patients disappearing without explanation. She wrote of seeing shadowy figures lurking in the corners, and of a presence that seemed to feed on the suffering within the walls. Her final entry was a desperate plea for help before abruptly ending. Suddenly, the room temperature plummeted. The lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. The whispers grew louder, circling me, voices overlapping in a chaotic crescendo. I felt invisible fingers brush my skin, and the sensation of being watched intensified. Panicking, I fled the room, racing through the corridors as the shadows seemed to close in behind me. When I burst out into the night air, I didn't stop running until the sanatorium was far behind. Though I left Blackwood Ridge that night, the haunting followed me. Strange noises in my home, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision, and a persistent feeling that something from the sanatorium had attached itself to me. The deeper truth about Blackwood Ridge may never fully surface, but one thing is certain: the pain and darkness that lived there never truly left. If you ever find yourself near the crumbling walls of Blackwood Ridge, remember the stories etched in silence and shadow. Some doors should remain closed, and some places should stay abandoned. The origins of Blackwood Ridge date back to the early 1900s, a time when mental health was poorly understood and often feared. Built on the outskirts of a small Appalachian town, the sanatorium was intended as a refuge for those deemed insane by society, people suffering from depression, anxiety, or more severe psychiatric conditions. But the hope it once represented quickly faded as the institution's reputation darkened. Early on, reports surfaced of patients disappearing mysteriously. Families were given vague explanations, transfers to other facilities, or the nature of their illness. But no one ever saw those patients again. Rumors began circulating that the sanatorium was conducting cruel experimental treatments. Under the guise of therapy, electroshock devices were wielded recklessly, and more invasive procedures, rumored to be nothing short of torture, were performed behind locked doors. I discovered that Dr. Harold Wexler was the sanatorium's chief psychiatrist during its most notorious period. Official records paint him as a respected physician, but whispered accounts among locals suggest something far more sinister. Staff who worked under Wexler spoke of his obsession with curing the mind at any cost, pushing boundaries that crossed into the macabre. One afternoon, while sifting through old newspapers in the local library, I found an article detailing a fire that broke out in Blackwood Ridge in 1932. The blaze destroyed part of the East Wing, tragically killing several patients. Official reports attribute the fire to an electrical fault, but the local lore tells a different story, that the fire was a desperate attempt to destroy evidence of horrific experiments. As dusk fell during my second night at the sanatorium, I explored the East Wing ruins. The charred remains of rooms whispered of suffering and fear. Among the debris, I found fragments of patients' belongings, torn clothing, a cracked porcelain doll, and a rusted syringe stained with dried blood. The air hung heavy with an acrid, metallic scent that night. My sleep was fractured by nightmares, visions of patients screaming in silent agony, faces twisted in despair, and the cold, unblinking eyes of Dr. Wexler watching from the shadows. When I awoke, my skin was clammy, and the faint echo of a scream lingered in my ears. The sanatorium's history seemed soaked in sorrow. But what unsettled me most were the accounts of paranormal activity in recent decades. Visitors and urban explorers reported hearing disembodied voices, feeling sudden drops in temperature, and seeing shadow figures darting through the ruins. Some claimed to have encountered malevolent presences that followed them home, invading their dreams. Determined to confront these stories, I returned to the therapy wing with my voice recorder and camera, hoping to capture any evidence. The corridor was suffocatingly silent, every creak amplified in the darkness. As I passed the old treatment rooms, a cold breeze brushed past me, despite the sealed windows. Suddenly, faint whispers began swirling around me, fragmented words and desperate pleas. My recorder picked up faint voices chanting in what sounded like an ancient language. The shadows on the walls flickered, taking on twisted shapes, faces contorted in pain, reaching out as if begging for release. I followed the sounds to the locked room I'd discovered earlier. The door was cold to the touch, and the strange symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly with an eerie light. As I pressed my ear against the door, I could hear muffled cries and the scrape of nails against wood. Unable to resist, I forced the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and barren, save for a rusted iron bed frame and chains bolted into the walls. A thick layer of dust coated the floor, but in the center lay an open journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. The journal belonged to Clara, the nurse whose writings had haunted me since my first visit. Her words described a descent into madness, her witnessing of unthinkable horrors, the patient's torment, and her growing terror at the doctor's experiments. She wrote of a ritual conducted by Wexler and his aides, attempting to bind the suffering souls to the sanatorium to contain their madness. Suddenly, the room grew unbearably cold. The door slammed shut behind me, and the whispers escalated into anguished screams. Shadows coalesced into a towering figure, its eyes blazing with fury and sorrow. It reached toward me, its presence crushing and suffocating, summoning every ounce of courage. I grabbed the journal and sprinted from the room. The screams echoed after me as I fled down the corridor and out into the night. Outside, the air felt lighter, but the sense of being watched remained. In the days since, strange things have followed, unexplained cold spots, fleeting shadows, and nightmares filled with the faces of Blackwood Ridge's lost souls. I realize now that the darkness is not confined to its crumbling walls. It has seeped into the world beyond, a lingering curse that will never truly fade. Blackwood Ridge stands as a grim monument to human suffering and cruelty, a place where the past refuses to rest. And if you ever find yourself near its ruins, listen closely. You might hear the whispers of those trapped between worlds, crying out for peace that may never come. Let's move to our fifth story. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, nestled far off the beaten path, lies an abandoned coal mining town known as Ash Hollow. Once a thriving community during the early 20th century, Ash Hollow now stands as a ghostly relic, a place where the echoes of hardship, tragedy, and untold horror still cling to the cracked and crumbling structures. Over the decades, the town was swallowed by the forest, leaving only broken buildings and twisted rails behind. But the dark history buried beneath the soil has never truly been forgotten. My journey to Ash Hollow began as part of an exploration project into forgotten Appalachian towns, but what I uncovered there was far beyond anything I could have imagined. The stories passed down by the few remaining locals paint Ash Hollow as a cursed place, haunted not just by the dead, but by something far more malevolent. Ash Hollow's history is marked by a catastrophic mining disaster in 1923, when a massive methane explosion trapped dozens of miners underground. The blast shattered the mountain, collapsing tunnels, and sealing many souls inside the dark depths forever. Official records claim the disaster ended the town's prosperity, but whispers tell of unnatural occurrences, strange lights flickering in the mine shafts, ghostly wails echoing through the trees, and shadowy figures lurking near the abandoned entrance. Drawn by these chilling accounts, I made my way to the remains of Ash Hollow on a fog-laden morning. The forest had reclaimed much of the town. Dilapidated houses leaned precariously, windows shattered, and rusted mining equipment lay scattered amid dense underbrush. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional creak of a swaying sign or the distant call of a raven. As I approached the old mine entrance, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The yawning mouth of the shaft gaped like a wound. In the earth surrounded by rotting timber supports that looked ready to collapse, the ground was littered with discarded tools, broken lanterns, and crumpled helmets, remnants of a tragedy frozen in time. Before venturing inside, I spoke with an elderly man in the nearby town of Pine Ridge, who warned me against going near Ash Hollow. He told tales of miner spirits trapped below, restless and angry, guarding secrets no living soul should uncover. He warned that those who enter the mines often don't return or come back changed, haunted by nightmares and voices no one else can hear. Undeterred, I ventured into the darkness. The air inside the mine was thick and stale, carrying a faint metallic temps. My footsteps echoed ominously as I followed the narrow tunnel deeper underground. The beam of my flashlight flickered as the walls closed in around me, the silence broken only by distant drips of water and the creak of wood struggling against the earth's weight. Suddenly, I heard a faint, sorrowful moan that seemed to rise from the bowels of the mine itself. It grew louder, swelling into a chorus of anguished cries and whispered names. The atmosphere became suffocating, as if the very walls were pressing in to trap me. Shadows twisted and moved at the edge of my vision, and the air felt charged with a malevolent energy. Deeper still, I discovered a collapsed chamber. Scratched into the wooden beams were desperate messages, names, dates, and frantic pleas for help. Among them, a chilling note read, "They never found the last ones. They are still down here, waiting." As fear gnawed at my resolve, I sensed a presence watching me, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to cling to the darkness itself. The whispers turned to guttural growls, and the temperature plunged. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me blind in the abyss. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my backup light. When it flickered on, I saw them, shadowy figures emerging from the walls, their eyes glowing with unearthly light. Their forms were twisted and distorted, faces contorted in eternal agony. They reached out with skeletal hands, their silent screams filling the suffocating air. I ran blindly through the tunnels, branches and rocks scraping at my skin. Behind me, the echoes of their cries followed like a funeral dirge. When I finally burst out into the cold night air, the moon hung low and pale, casting long shadows across the ruins of Ash Hollow. Since that night, the memories haunt me. Strange noises echo in the silence of my home, and sometimes, when darkness falls, I swear, I hear the distant wailing of the miners calling, waiting, never at rest. Ash Hollow is more than a ghost town. It's a graveyard of souls trapped between worlds, cursed to forever wander the darkness they cannot escape. If you ever come across Ash Hollow or any abandoned mining town hidden in the Appalachians, remember this: some places hold on to their horrors long after the last light fades, and some stories are better left buried beneath the earth. After my harrowing escape from the mine's suffocating darkness, I found little peace. The images of those shadowy figures, the trapped souls of miners, haunted every corner of my mind. But what stayed with me most wasn't just the vision of the dead. It was the weight of the story etched into the very bones of Ash Hollow. A story that refused to stay buried beneath the rubble and overgrowth. Digging deeper into the town's history, I uncovered old newspaper clippings and personal accounts that revealed how Ash Hollow was once a bustling hub of life. Families lived in tightly knit communities, their lives revolving around the unforgiving rhythms of the coal mine. The mine wasn't just a job, it was the heartbeat of the town. Yet beneath the camaraderie and industry lay a darker reality: hazardous working conditions, greed, and desperation that fed the tragedy to come. The explosion of 1923 was more than an accident. It was a catastrophe born from neglect and silence. The company owners had ignored warnings about methane buildup, and miners had reported strange occurrences in the tunnels beforehand: noises, flickering lights, and a pervasive sense of unease. But their concerns were brushed aside, dismissed in favor of profit. Survivors spoke of the moments before the blast with horror: a sudden roaring, the ground shaking, and then an overwhelming wave of fire and smoke that swallowed everything. Many escaped, but dozens were trapped, their fates sealed beneath tons of rock and earth. What disturbed me further were the tales of miners who did escape but were never the same. They spoke of strange visions in the tunnels, shadowy figures beckoning them deeper, voices calling their names in tones that chilled their souls. Some disappeared without explanation, vanishing into the forests surrounding Ash Hollow. One particularly chilling account came from the journal of a man named Samuel, a miner who lived through the explosion. His final entry was a desperate cry for help, describing how something ancient stirred in the mine, something that fed on fear and death. He wrote of a presence that claimed the souls of the lost, trapping them in an endless nightmare beneath the mountain. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lurked in Ash Hollow was more than restless spirits. It was an ancient evil, entwined with the land itself, an entity born from the pain and suffering of countless lives extinguished in the dark. On my third visit to the site, I returned with equipment to document and hopefully understand what haunted Ash Hollow. The forest seemed to close around me, the trees whispering warnings I couldn't ignore. As I approached the mine entrance, the air grew thick with a choking mist, and the earth beneath my feet seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Inside the tunnels, the oppressive darkness returned. The walls seemed to breathe, shadows stretching and retreating as if alive. I heard the distant drip of water, a soft lament carried on the stale air. Then, from the depths, a guttural growl echoed, followed by whispers in a language I couldn't comprehend, ancient and cruel. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a low rumble shook the tunnel. I felt hands, cold, clammy, and desperate, brush against my skin. My flashlight flickered, revealing glimpses of twisted faces, their eyes burning with sorrow and rage. Panicking, I fled deeper into the mine, only to find the passage blocked by fallen debris. Trapped, I could hear the spirits closing in, their voices rising into a maddening cacophony. I pressed myself against the cold stone, willing my heart to slow as shadows writhed around me. After what felt like an eternity, the tremors ceased, and the voices faded. The tunnel slowly cleared, revealing a narrow escape route. I crawled through, emerging into the night air, gasping and shaken. The experience left me forever changed. I carry the weight of Ash Hollow's darkness with me, a reminder that some places never truly die. They hold on to their pain, their rage, their stories. Now whenever the wind howls through the trees, or the night feels too still, I wonder if the miners are calling, waiting for someone to hear their cries, and finally set them free. Let's move to our sixth story. Deep in the Appalachian wilderness, hidden beneath a thick canopy of ancient trees, lies the ruins of an old logging camp known as Whispering Pines. Once a bustling hub of industry and hard labor, today it stands, abandoned and forgotten, swallowed by nature and steeped in silence. But beneath its quiet surface, a dark tale lingers, one of obsession, madness, and a curse that refuses to rest. My name is Emily, and I first heard of Whispering Pines from a group of seasoned hikers who spoke in hushed tones about strange happenings near the ruins. Drawn by curiosity and an urge to uncover the truth behind the legends, I decided to explore the area myself. What I found was far beyond any story told around campfires. Whispering Pines was established in the early 1900s as part of the booming logging industry that shaped the Appalachian economy. Men from all over came to cut timber and make their fortunes, carving roads and building cabins in the dense forest. But the camp was short-lived. Within a few decades, a series of tragedies and disappearances forced its abandonment. Local folklore holds that the camp's downfall began when a man named Elias Crane arrived, a solitary figure with a mysterious past. Elias was the lead foreman, known for his ruthless work ethic and strange rituals performed deep in the woods. Some say he was searching for something, an ancient spirit or power hidden beneath the forest floor. The first unsettling events were small tools misplaced, eerie whispers on the wind, and the feeling of being watched. Then came the disappearances, one logger after another vanishing without a trace. The men who remained grew paranoid, turning on each other as fear festered like rot. One night, a group of loggers confronted Elias, accusing him of witchcraft and blaming him for their misfortunes. They chased him into the woods, but he was never seen again. Shortly after, the camp fell silent, abandoned as the men fled in terror. When I arrived at Whispering Pines, the remains were hauntingly beautiful moss-covered cabins, half surrounded by trees, rusted tools scattered like forgotten bones, and a dense fog that seemed to cling to everything. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of dying timber. As I explored, I found symbols carved into tree trunks, strange runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. I felt eyes watching me from the shadows, and shadows that moved just beyond the edge of my vision. The air grew heavy, charged with something ancient and malevolent. That night, as I camped near the ruins, I was awakened by whispers carried on the wind, voices calling my name in a language I couldn't understand. The forest seemed alive, branches scraping against my tent like skeletal fingers. I caught glimpses of flickering lights moving between the trees, will-o-wisps, or something darker. Driven by a mixture of fear and fascination, I followed the lights deep into the forest, where I discovered a hidden clearing encircled by towering pines. In the center stood a stone altar covered in moss and strange carvings. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. Suddenly the ground trembled, and the whispers turned into guttural chants. From the shadows, figures emerged, gaunt faces with hollow eyes, dressed in tattered clothing. They moved silently, surrounding me in a cold embrace. I realized then that Whispering Pines was not just haunted, it was cursed. The spirits of the lost loggers, trapped by Elias's dark rituals, condemned to wander forever, bound to the forest and the ancient power he had sought. I barely escaped that night, running through the underbrush with branches tearing at my skin, the voices echoing in my ears. Since then, I've been haunted by nightmares and strange visions, forests that shift and breathe, shadows that reach out to me in the dark. Whispering Pines remains a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where the line between the living and the dead blurs beneath the whispering trees. If you ever hear the soft murmur of voices carried on the Appalachian wind, beware, you might be close to a place where darkness still holds sway. After my terrifying night in the forest near Whispering Pines, I felt an overwhelming need to uncover who Elias Crane really was and what dark secrets he had brought into the woods. The locals were tight-lipped, but piecing together fragments from old journals, letters, and town records, I began to see a man consumed by obsession. Elias Crane arrived in the Appalachian region in the late 1800s, a man shrouded in mystery. Some accounts described him as a scholar of the occult, others as a disgraced miner searching for redemption. He was drawn to the dense forest around Whispering Pines, convinced it held ancient power hidden beneath its roots. Power, he believed, could grant control over life and death. His early days at the logging camp seemed normal enough, but soon he began performing strange ceremonies deep in the woods. Witnesses reported seeing him chanting around crude altars, burning herbs, and carving symbols into trees and stone. His behavior alienated the other men, who whispered that he was cursed or possessed. The disappearances started shortly after men, vanishing without explanation, their belongings left behind in the dark forest. Some said Elias summoned spirits to punish the greedy or the weak. Others believed he opened a door to something far older and more malevolent, something that had lain dormant for centuries. One chilling entry from a journal belonging to a logger named Jacob describes stumbling upon a grotesque scene. Bodies arranged in a circle around a bloodied altar, eyes staring blankly, and the unmistakable presence of something unnatural lurking nearby. Jacob barely escaped with his life, and soon after, he disappeared without a trace. As I delved deeper, I uncovered references to an ancient Appalachian legend, the Wraith of the Pines, a vengeful spirit said to inhabit the forest and consume the souls of the lost. It was said to manifest as a shifting shadow, whispering promises of power before dragging victims into eternal darkness. Some believed Elias had bound this spirit to the camp through his rituals, trapping both himself and the men in a nightmare they could not escape. My nights since visiting Whispering Pines have been plagued by restless dreams, visions of towering pines closing in, faces twisted in torment, and whispers calling me deeper into the woods. I sometimes hear faint scratching on my windows, or feel a cold breath on my neck when alone. I've come to realize that the curse of Whispering Pines is not confined to its ruins. It follows those who seek the truth, a darkness that feeds on curiosity and fear. The forest itself seems to pulse with ancient energy, alive with the sorrow and rage of the trapped souls. This story is not just about an abandoned logging camp, but a warning. Some places harbor secrets meant to stay buried. The shadows beneath the Whispering Pines are patient. They wait for the next soul foolish enough to wander too close. If you ever find yourself near those towering trees, listen closely. You might hear the soft rustle of a chant, the echo of lost voices, and the whisper of a curse older than the mountains themselves. Let's move to our seventh story. Nestled deep within the Appalachian wilderness, far from any paved road or modern convenience, stands the skeletal remains of Greywood Sanitarium, a place whose walls have witnessed untold suffering, secrets, and shadows that refuse to fade. Once a state-of-the-art mental health facility, Greywood was abruptly shut down in the late 1960s under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind empty halls and countless unanswered questions. The locals speak of strange noises, flickering lights, and ghostly figures roaming the derelict corridors. But beneath the eerie tales lies a far darker truth, one that still haunts those who dared to uncover it. My interest in Greywood began when I stumbled upon an old news clipping describing the facility's sudden closure. According to the reports, Greywood had been forced to shut after a series of disturbing incidents involving patients and staff alike. Events so chilling that the state government sealed the building and erased it from official records. No public explanation was ever given, and over time, the sanitarium slipped into obscurity. Determined to find out what really happened, I tracked down former employees and relatives of patients who whispered about the horrors that unfolded inside those walls. They spoke of experimental treatments, unauthorized surgeries, and patients subjected to cruel, unorthodox therapies that pushed the limits of human endurance and sanity. One former nurse, who wished to remain anonymous, described Greywood as a place where the line between doctor and monster blurred. She told me about Dr. Marcus Ellery, the head psychiatrist, whose obsession with unlocking the hidden layers of the mind drove him to conduct secret experiments on vulnerable patients. Ellery's methods were brutal, combining drugs, sensory deprivation, and psychological torture in a quest to cure what he called the deepest shadows within the human psyche. As I delved deeper, I learned that many patients reportedly experienced terrifying hallucinations, visions of shadowy figures that whispered in forgotten tongues, faces appearing in mirrors that weren't their own, and voices echoing from empty rooms. Some vanished without explanation. Others were found dead, under circumstances ruled as suicides or accidents, though many suspected foul play. The most disturbing stories came from a young patient named Sarah, whose diary surfaced decades later. In her entries, she detailed encounters with a dark entity she called the Watcher, a presence she believed haunted the building and manipulated the minds of the patients. She wrote of nights filled with cold hands grabbing at her, whispers promising freedom, but delivering torment, and shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. Determined to see for myself, I gained access to the derelict Greywood Sanitarium. The building's facade was cracked and worn, windows shattered or boarded up, vines creeping over the stone. Inside, the air was thick with decay, and the silence felt suffocating. As I wandered the endless corridors, I could almost hear the faint echoes of cries and laughter, remnants of lives trapped in torment. In the heart of the sanitarium, I found a locked room marked experimentation. Breaking in, I uncovered rusted medical equipment, torn patient files, and walls scratched with desperate messages. "Help me, he's here, and don't trust the light." The atmosphere was charged with dread, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching me. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, carrying with it a low, guttural whisper. The lights flickered, and the shadows deepened, seeming to pulse with a sinister life. I caught glimpses of movement just beyond the edge of my vision, figures with hollow eyes and twisted forms that dissolved when I turned. The night stretched on, filled with unexplainable noises, distant footsteps, muffled screams, and the eerie tapping of something clawing at the walls. My sense of reality began to fracture under the pressure of the oppressive presence. It was as if the building itself was alive, feeding off fear and despair. I barely escaped as dawn broke, the first light burning away the shadows, but never the memories. Since then, I've been haunted by fragments of that night, fleeting images and reflections, unexplained cold spots, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. Greywood Sanitarium remains a place where the tortured past clings stubbornly to the present, where the shadows of human suffering refuse to fade, and where the darkest corners of the mind can manifest into terrifying reality. For those who dare to seek the truth, beware, the past does not always stay buried. And some horrors never truly die, ChatGPT said. After escaping the suffocating darkness of Greywood Sanitarium that first night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building had marked me somehow. The shadows seemed to cling to my thoughts, twisting memories and invading dreams. Determined to understand the true horror of Greywood, I reached out to former patients, families, ex-staff, and even paranormal investigators who had ventured. Inside, one former orderly, a man named Robert, recounted his time working at Greywood with a trembling voice. He described how the staff lived in fear, not only of the patients, but of the building itself. Robert revealed that Dr. Marcus Ellery was a man obsessed with unlocking hidden corridors of the mind, often experimenting on patients without consent. These experiments blurred the lines between science and ritual, combining drugs with sensory deprivation chambers and prolonged isolation. Patients sometimes emerged catatonic, or worse, transformed in ways no one could explain. Robert spoke of the Watcher, a name whispered among the staff, for the dark presence that seemed to control the facility. Many believed this entity was tied to Ellery's experiments, born from his hubris and cruelty. It was said to lurk in the darkest corners, feeding on the fears and madness that permeated the halls. Further accounts came from a woman named Linda, whose brother was a patient at Greywood during its final years. She shared her brother's diary, filled with chilling entries about voices in the walls and eyes in the darkness. He wrote of days when the sun never seemed to shine inside the building, and nights when unseen hands held him down, whispering secrets he couldn't forget. One entry detailed an event called the crossing, a terrifying procedure where patients were subjected to extreme psychological trials designed to break down their minds and expose their true selves. Many never returned from these sessions, their fates unknown. As I dug through old hospital archives, I uncovered blueprints showing a secret basement beneath Greywood. Rumors suggested that Ellery conducted his most sinister experiments there, in rooms sealed off from the rest of the staff. Determined to find out more, I returned to Greywood, this time prepared to explore the depths. Navigating the crumbling stairwell leading underground, I descended into a maze of cold, damp corridors. The air grew thick with mildew, and something darker, an oppressive weight that pressed down on my chest. Flickering lights revealed rusted cages, broken restraints, and remnants of medical devices covered in rust and mold. On a cracked metal table lay faded patient records and a shattered mirror reflecting twisted faces. The walls were scrawled with desperate messages, some in English, others in symbols I couldn't decipher. As I ventured further, I felt the presence growing stronger, the whispering voices echoing louder, seeping into my mind. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. In the pitch black, I sensed movement, cold breath on my neck, faint scratching sounds, and distant mournful cries. Panic surged as I stumbled blindly forward, heart pounding, until a faint glow appeared ahead. I found myself in a chamber marked the crossing, its walls covered in strange sigils. At its center stood a grotesque device, part mechanical, part occult, covered in dried blood and rust. The air was thick with energy, and I realized this was the place where Ellery's true horror was born. Whispers rose around me, voices pleading for release, cursing the living, warning me to leave. A shadow moved just beyond the glow, watching, waiting. I barely escaped the basement, the oppressive darkness clawing at my sanity. Since that day, the line between reality and nightmare has blurred. I'd been plagued by visions of Greywood, distorted in agony, dark hands reaching from walls, and the ever-present watcher lurking just out of sight. Greywood Sanitarium is not just a relic of the past, it is a living nightmare. A place where the human mind's deepest fears have taken shape. The souls trapped there cry out in silence, waiting for someone to end their torment. But some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Let's move to our 8th story, Deep. Within the forgotten hollows of the Appalachian Mountains lies the shattered remains of Milltown Amusement Park, a place once alive with laughter and light, now silent and crumbling under the weight of years and tragedy. For decades, Milltown was a beloved local escape, drawing families to its wooden roller coasters, carousel rides, and midway games. But a series of mysterious accidents and disappearances in the late 1970s led to its abrupt closure. And since then, it has become a dark legend, whispered about by nearby residents. My name is Daniel, and I first heard about Milltown through an old friend whose grandfather worked there as a maintenance man before the park shut down. He told me stories of strange occurrences, children vanishing without a trace, rides that moved on their own, and an overwhelming sense of dread that settled over the park like a shadow. Intrigued and unsettled, I decided to explore Milltown myself to uncover what had truly happened in its final days. As I approached the park's rusting gates, I felt a chill that wasn't just from the crisp mountain air. The faded signs and peeling paint seemed to watch me, and the once vibrant colors of the carousel horses were now dulled and cracked. The laughter that once filled the air had long since been replaced by an oppressive silence. Locals spoke of the Laughing Man, a sinister figure said to haunt the park after dark. They claimed he was the ghost of a disgruntled employee who perished in a tragic accident on the roller coaster's highest peak. Some believed he was responsible for the disappearances, luring children into the shadows with eerie laughter and promises of fun. The first time I stepped inside, I was struck by the overwhelming decay veins creeping through broken windows, rusted metal groaning in the wind, and the smell of damp wood and rust. But as I wandered deeper, I began to notice subtle signs of something more disturbing. Footprints in the dust, faint music playing from an unseen source, and fleeting shadows darting between the rides. One night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I decided to stay until dark to see if the stories held any truth. As darkness fell, the park seemed to awaken. The carousel began to creak and turn on its own, playing a warped, distorted tune. The wind carried soft giggles and whispers, as if the echoes of long-lost children were reaching out. Suddenly, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the Ferris wheel, a pale boy in old-fashioned clothing, his eyes hollow and sad. He vanished before I could approach, leaving only a cold spot in the air. I realized then that Milltown was not just abandoned, it was trapped in a liminal space where the past and present collided. As I delved into the history of Milltown, I discovered the tragic story of Clara, a young girl who disappeared from the park on its final day of operation. Witnesses claimed to have seen her playing near the carousel, but she was never found. Some say her spirit remains, forever searching for the family she lost. The more I explored, the more I sensed the presence of something ancient and malevolent beneath the park. A dark force feeding on sorrow and fear, binding the lost souls too. The rusting rides and broken games, Milltown Amusement Park is a place where joy turned to despair, laughter to silence, and life to endless haunting. It serves as a chilling reminder that some memories refuse to fade, and some places are forever cursed by the tragedies they witnessed. After that first chilling night at Milltown Amusement Park, I felt an unshakable pull to uncover more about its dark past. The locals, wary and tight-lipped, offered fragments of tales, each more disturbing than the last. Many spoke of a secret society that once operated behind the scenes, a group of influential town figures who used the park for rituals meant to secure prosperity at any cost. Some believed these ceremonies angered an ancient Appalachian spirit, cursing the park and everyone connected to it. One old man, the grandson of a former ride operator, shared a story about the park's roller coaster, the Shadow Serpent. He told me how, on the night before Milltown's closure, a group of teenagers dared to ride it after hours, only for the coaster to derail mysteriously, plunging into the ravine below. The wreckage was never fully recovered, and several of those teens vanished without a trace. After that, the park was sealed off and left to rot. Digging through faded newspapers and archives, I found reports of strange occurrences just before the closure rides that operated on their own eerie laughter, echoing in empty streets, and sightings of shadowy figures moving between the rusting attractions. Employees quit in droves, plagued by nightmares and unexplained injuries. One haunting entry in a local diary spoke of the Ferris wheel of souls, where those who disappeared were said to be trapped, endlessly circling between the worlds of the living and the dead. It was said that at midnight the wheel would turn on its own, carrying ghostly passengers lost to the curse. Determined to experience the supernatural myself, I returned to Milltown on a cold, moonless night. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the creak of the carousel and distant whispers. As the clock struck midnight, the Ferris wheel slowly began to rotate, creaking and groaning under the weight of unseen riders. Suddenly, the faint glow of lanterns flickered to life along the midway, illuminating ghostly figures, children with vacant eyes, playing games no longer there. I could hear faint giggles, the clinking of marbles, and the soft echo of carnival music warped by time as I walked the deserted paths. The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I glimpsed the laughing Manna, tall figure in tattered clothes, his face obscured by shadow, but his chilling laughter filling the night air. Frozen in fear, I watched as he vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a cold gust that sent shivers down my spine. The night stretched on in a haze of terrifying encounters, whispers calling my name, hands brushing against my arms, and glimpses of Clara's sorrowful spirit pleading for release. I realized that the park was a prison, holding captive not just the spirits of the lost children, but the very darkness that had consumed them. Milltown Amusement Park remains a monument to tragedy and torment, a place where joy and horror coexist in a fragile, deadly balance. For those who dare to walk its broken paths, beware, the echoes of the past are never truly silent, and some curses never fade. The more time I spent researching Milltown Amusement Park, the clearer it became that the surface stories were just the beginning, mere shadows of a deeper, more sinister truth lurking beneath. The so-called secret society, known only as the Keepers of the Hollow, had roots reaching far beyond the park. Their influence seeped into every corner of the town, weaving a web of power and silence designed to hide what really happened. Records hinted that the Keepers believed the land beneath Milltown held an ancient, restless entity, a spirit older than the mountains themselves. To appease it and harness its power, they conducted dark rituals during the park's grand openings and anniversaries. These ceremonies involved offerings, sometimes inhuman, meant to ensure prosperity and protection. The accidents and disappearances were whispered to be consequences of these offerings gone wrong, or deliberate sacrifices to maintain the pact. Uncovered faded photographs showing masked figures performing rites in the park, Issa's central plaza. Faces hidden, symbols carved into the ground. Town elders avoided speaking of the Keepers, their silence as telling as any confession. One chilling letter from a former member surfaced, warning of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. The letter detailed how the rituals corrupted the land, twisting the spirits of the innocent into vengeful ghosts bound to the park's decaying rides. On another visit to the park, I found an old hidden chamber beneath the carousel, its walls were etched with cryptic symbols and dark stains, remnants of blood and incense. The air was thick and oppressive, and the silence almost deafening. There, I felt the full weight of the curse, the sorrow, rage, and despair fused into an energy that pulsed with every heartbeat. That night, as I left the chamber, I was nearly trapped by a sudden whirlwind of shadowy figures swirling around me, their faces contorted with anguish. I barely escaped, the sound of their mournful cries chasing me through the woods. Since then, my dreams have been haunted by visions of the laughing man leading a parade of lost souls through a carnival of shadows, their faces frozen in eternal torment. I've felt cold hands reaching through walls, heard whispered warnings in dead languages, and seen the park's twisted reflection in every quiet place I visit. Milltown is more than an abandoned amusement park. It is a nexus where the living and the dead collide, a place cursed by ancient powers and human greed. Its laughter is a scream, its joy a mask for unspeakable pain. If you ever find yourself near its rusting gates, listen closely for the music of the lost, and beware the laughing man's call. Some places are best left forgotten, but the shadows of Milltown will always reach out to those who dare to remember. Let's move to our ninth story. Deep in the Appalachian wilderness, hidden beneath thick canopies of ancient trees and tangled undergrowth, lies the forgotten remains of the Black Hollow Mina, once bustling coal mine that suddenly closed down. Over 50 years ago, after a series of mysterious accidents and disappearances, the mine's history is stained with tragedy and whispered secrets, and locals avoid its entrance, warning that something evil still lurks deep underground. My fascination with Black Hollow began after a chance encounter with an elderly miner named Joe, who had worked there before its abrupt closure. Joe's eyes darkened when he spoke of the mine, and his voice dropped to a whisper as he recounted the strange events that led to its downfall. According to him, miners began reporting terrifying visions in the tunnels, whispers echoing from the walls, and a growing sense of dread that infected the entire workforce. The mine, he said, was cursed long before it ever opened, built over an ancient burial ground of a forgotten tribe. Miners who ignored the warnings met untimely death, some crushed by collapses, others vanished without a trace. The mine's owner pushed for production, despite growing concerns, until the final disaster sealed its fate. Determined to uncover the truth, I journeyed to Black Hollow Mine, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a recorder. The entrance yawns like a gaping wound in the earth, its rusted gates chained and padlocked but weakened by time. The air around it is unnaturally cold and heavy, and the silence presses in from all sides. Inside the mine's mouth, the darkness swallows every step, and the walls seem to close in. The faint drip of water echoes endlessly, and the smell of damp, earth and decay permeates the air. As I ventured deeper, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, the shadows around me shifting and swirling. In the deepest tunnels, I discovered remnants of old mining equipment, twisted rails, and faded markings left by the miners. Etched into the stone walls were strange symbols, some resembling tribal markings, others more arcane and mysterious. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and an icy wind swept through the tunnel, carrying with it a chorus of faint, mournful voices. I strained to listen, hearing whispers in a language long lost, promising release but warning of doom. A flash of movement caught my eye, a figure draped in shadow, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It vanished before I could focus, leaving behind a chilling silence. My heart pounded as I realized I was not alone. Back above ground, locals told me stories of miners who never returned, and strange lights flickering over the mine at night. Some claimed to see ghostly figures emerging from the depths, their faces twisted in pain and anger. Black Hollow Mine is more than a derelict coal mine. It is a gateway to something ancient and malevolent, a place where the dead refuse to rest, and the living risk losing their souls. As I spent more time near Black Hollow Mine, collecting stories and piecing together its dark past, a pattern began to emerge. The disappearances and accidents were never random. Every tragedy seemed linked to a particular part of the mine, known as the Veil, a narrow twisting tunnel rumored to be the deepest and most cursed section. Miners who entered the Veil spoke of a suffocating presence that twisted reality, causing hallucinations and terror unlike anything they had ever experienced. Some never came back. Those who did were changed, silent, haunted, and broken. One old miner named Samuel recounted his last days underground. He described descending into the vale with a small crew, only to witness their equipment malfunction and lights flicker wildly. The walls seemed to breathe, and shadows shifted with unnatural life. Samuel claimed to have seen ghostly figures, watching from the darkness, faces pale and distorted, mouths open in silent screams. When one of his comrades suddenly vanished without a trace, panic erupted. Samuel fled, but the darkness seemed to chase him, whispering secrets that gnawed at his mind. I listened to Samuel's trembling voice as he detailed how he barely escaped with his life. Forever scarred by what he'd seen, his story was just one of many, each filled with similar horrors and inexplicable phenomena. Miners spoke of strange chants echoing through the tunnels, cold spots that froze breath, and eyes glowing in the blackness. Determined to understand what lay beneath the surface, I began researching the indigenous tribe believed to have once lived where the mine was built. They were known as the Wahuga, a people who revered the land and believed in powerful spirits that guarded the mountains. According to legend, the Wahuga cursed any who desecrated their sacred burial grounds, especially those who dug too deep. The mine's construction had ripped through these burial sites, disturbing restless spirits bound by ancient rites. Some believed the strange symbols etched in the mine walls were protective wards placed by the Wahuga shamans, meant to trap the evil unleashed below. But over time, the wards weakened, allowing malevolent entities to seep into the tunnels. One night, I ventured back to Black Hollow alone, compelled by a force I couldn't explain. Armed with my recorder and a camera, I crossed the rusted gates under a moonless sky. The cold bit into my skin, and the silence was so thick it felt like a living thing. Inside the mine's entrance, my flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing graffiti and warnings scrawled by previous trespassers, please to turn back, signs of madness. I followed the path toward the vale, heart pounding, every step heavy with dread. Suddenly, a low guttural growl echoed from deep within the tunnels. The air grew icy, and shadows writhed on the walls. My recorder picked up faint whispers chanting in the lost Wahuga tongue, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. A sudden flash of movement caught my Aja figure cloaked in shadow with glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness. I froze, unable to move as the entity advanced, its breath cold as the grave. It reached toward me with skeletal hands, and a wave of unbearable despair crashed over my mind. I turned and ran, the sound of claws scraping stone chasing me as I fled into the night. When I finally broke the surface, gasping for air, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the mountains. Since that night, the darkness follows me. Dreams of the mine's depths haunt my sleep, visions of lost miners, trapped souls pleading for release, and the relentless, watchful evil lurking beneath. Black Hollow. The mine remains sealed, but its curse endures. Black Hollow Mine is not just a place of forgotten industry. It is a gateway to a shadow world, where the living risk becoming lost forever. The stories I gathered from locals only deepened the chilling mystery surrounding Black Hollow Mine. Several old-timers spoke of a ritual performed in secret by the town's founders, intended to bind the restless spirits beneath the mountain and protect the town. They called it the Binding of the Hollow. According to legend, the ceremony involved a shaman from the Wahuga tribe who agreed to perform sacred rites in exchange for sparing the townspeople. But something went terribly wrong. The ritual, they said, fractured the barrier between worlds, rather than sealing it. Instead of peace, it unleashed a malevolent force into the tunnels, a dark presence that feeds on fear and suffering. Some whispered that this entity, known locally as the Hollow One, manipulates the shadows, warping reality and driving those who enter mad or lost forever. One chilling account came from a woman named Mary, whose father was a miner at Black Hollow before the mine's closure. Mary told me how her father would come home, covered in soot, but also bruised and terrified, often speaking of voices calling his name from the tunnels and unseen hands pulling at his clothes. When he finally refused to return, he was shunned by the town's leaders who feared the truth leaking out. Mary's father disappeared shortly after the mine shut down, vanished without a trace, leaving only his last frantic note. The hollow calls. It will never let me go. To this day, locals claim that on stormy nights, you can hear eerie knocking coming from the mine's sealed entrance. Some swear they've seen ghostly figures wandering the woods nearby, miners trapped between worlds, cursed to endlessly search for escape. One experienced paranormal investigator I interviewed described visiting the site with his team. They encountered inexplicable temperature drops, sudden electronic malfunctions, and disembodied voices whispering warnings. His recordings captured low-frequency hums and screams that defied explanation. In his most harrowing account, the investigator claimed to have witnessed shadowy tendrils creeping along the walls, reaching for him, and an overwhelming sense of dread that forced him to flee. The deeper I delved, the more convinced I became that Black Hollow mine was a threshold to something far beyond the natural, a place where the veil between the living and the dead grows thin, and ancient powers seep through the cracks. The mine's legacy is one of sorrow and fear, a reminder that some places are scarred by more than time, and some wounds refuse to heal. Let's move to our 10th story. Nestled deep within the Appalachian wilderness, the abandoned Herocrest Sanitarium stands as a monument to forgotten horrors and whispered madness. Once a sprawling institution dedicated to treating the mentally ill, Herocrest's dark past is riddled with tales of inhumane treatments, mysterious disappearances, and chilling hauntings that persist decades after its closure. Locals avoid the crumbling facility, claiming it is a place where time distorts and restless spirits roam freely, trapped by the echoes of their suffering. My interest in Herocrest began after hearing a rumor from a retired nurse who once worked there. She spoke of secret wings that were never officially documented, rooms where patients vanished without explanation, and late-night screams that could chill the blood of even the bravest staff. Determined to uncover the truth, I set out to piece together the history of this forsaken institution, the will of the building itself. The keeper was said to appear suddenly, cloaked in darkness, with glowing eyes that pierced through the gloom. Staff whispered that this entity was once a cruel head nurse who had died mysteriously within the sanitarium. Her spirit twisted by years of torment and suffering she both endured and inflicted. One nurse, Evelyn, who worked the night shift in the 1960s, recalled a chilling encounter. She was making her rounds when she heard the faint sound of footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate. Turning, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor, its eyes shining unnaturally bright. Frozen with fear, Evelyn could only watch as the figure slowly raised a bony finger, pointing directly at her before vanishing into the peeling wallpaper. After that night, Evelyn refused to work alone and eventually left the institution altogether, her health deteriorating rapidly in the following years. Patients' accounts were even more harrowing. Many described waking in the dead of night to find unseen hands gripping their arms or voices whispering horrific threats in their ears. Some spoke of being dragged through walls or seeing their fellow patients vanish in bursts of cold mist. The air itself, inside Herocrest, was thick with despair, as if the building fed on the pain of those trapped within. Clara's journal offered a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a woman, slowly consumed by the darkness. Her writings became increasingly fragmented, filled with references to the endless halls, the eyes watching from the walls, and the whispers that never stop. She wrote about shadowy figures visiting her cell, and how the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Her last entry was a desperate plea. "Help me escape before the darkness takes me to," seeking to understand the experiments rumored to have been conducted. I uncovered classified documents hinting at cruel practices far beyond accepted medical standards. The sanitarium had participated in controversial treatments involving sensory deprivation, chemical trials, and mind-altering drugs intended to control or erase patients' memories. Some reports mentioned unauthorized surgeries and the use of electrical shocks so severe that they left permanent damage. One chilling document described a secret project, Silence, aimed at subduing violent patients through experimental means. Witnesses suggested that many patients subjected to these trials never returned to the wards. They disappeared into a hidden wing, their fates unknown. The hidden chamber I found deep within the abandoned building was likely linked to these experiments. The arcane symbols carved into the walls suggested the staff may have resorted to occult practices in a desperate attempt to control the spirits, or even patients themselves. This blend of science and superstition created a volatile environment, where sanity was fragile and horror inevitable. During my nights inside Harrowcrest, the paranormal activity intensified. Doors slammed without cause, disembodied voices echoed in empty corridors, and chilling laughter reverberated through the halls. Once, as I sat in what remained of the main lounge, I heard the distinct sound of a piano playing, a haunting melody that grew louder and then abruptly stopped. One night, trapped in a room believed to be an old electroshock therapy chamber, the walls seemed to close in, and I felt an overwhelming pressure on my chest. I heard the whispered command, "Stay forever." The room grew ice cold, and ghostly hands reached out from the darkness. I barely escaped, gasping for breath and trembling from the encounter. Harrowcrest Sanitarium remains a dark wound on the Appalachian landscape, a place where human cruelty, lost souls, and malevolent spirits intertwine. Its story is a chilling reminder of how forgotten places can hold the darkest secrets, and how some horrors refuse to fade with time. Constructed in the early 1900s, Harrowcrest Sanitarium was hailed as a state-of-the-art facility, designed to offer comfort and care to those suffering from mental illness. However, beneath the surface of its pristine facade, darker forces lurked. Reports of cruel treatments, electroshock therapy without anesthesia, lobotomies performed without consent, and isolation cells paint a grim picture of human suffering. Patients described feeling watched, hearing disembodied voices, and seeing shadowy figures moving in the corridors. Some documented encounters with the keeper, a sinister presence rumored to patrol the halls, ensuring that no one escaped the prison of their own minds. Many believed the institution itself was alive, feeding off the pain and despair trapped within its walls. The sanitarium's closure in the late 1970s was shrouded in mystery. Official records cite financial difficulties and changes in mental health policy. But rumors tell of a mass disappearance, dozens of patients and staff vanishing overnight, never to be seen again. Locals claim that Harrowcrest was abruptly sealed, the doors locked from the inside, leaving the missing trapped forever. When I first stepped inside the decaying building, the air was thick with dust and a heavy, oppressive silence. Flickers of movement danced in the corner of my eye, and the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. As I explored the maze-like halls, I uncovered old patient records, yellowed photographs, and chilling messages scrawled on the walls, pleas for help, warnings of the keeper, and cryptic symbols etched in blood-red paint. One journal, belonging to a patient named Clara, stood out. In her entries, she described terrifying nightmares, voices urging her to join the others, and sightings of a dark figure lurking just beyond her vision. Her final entry ended abruptly with the words, "They're coming for me." The deeper I ventured, the more palpable the sense of dread became. I heard faint whispers calling my name, felt cold hands brush against my skin, and glimpsed shadowy silhouettes that vanished when confronted. It became clear that Harrowcrest's horrors were not confined to the past. The restless souls trapped within still sought release, and perhaps revenge. In one of the forgotten wings, I discovered a hidden chamber filled with strange medical equipment and arcane symbols, suggesting that some patients were subjected to experiments beyond conventional medicine. The room radiated a malevolent energy, as if the walls themselves absorbed the suffering endured inside. Over several nights, I recorded unexplained sounds, echoes of distant screams, the clang of metal on metal, and low guttural growls reverberating through the halls. My cameras captured fleeting shadows and orbs of light darting through the darkness. At times, the temperature dropped suddenly, and a suffocating feeling of despair overwhelmed me. One chilling encounter occurred when I was investigating the isolation cells. The door to one cell slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The room grew cold, and a whisper echoed in my ear, "You can never leave." Panicked, I struggled to open the door, which finally gave way after what felt like hours. When I emerged, the hallway had transformed. Faded faces appeared in peeling wallpaper, and the lights flickered erratically. Harrowcrest Sanitarium is a place where the past and present blur, where pain and madness have left permanent scars. It is a tomb for forgotten souls, and a warning to those who dare to uncover its secrets. Let's move to our 11th story. Deep within the rugged terrain of the Appalachian, Mountains lies the remnants of an old logging town called Graywood, a place that once thrived on the backs of hard-working men who carved civilization out of the dense forest. But what remains now is a ghostly shell, swallowed by nature and shadowed by a dark history few dare to speak of. Graywood was abandoned suddenly in the late 1940s after a series of tragic accidents and unexplained disappearances plagued the town. Whispers of a malevolent forest spirit, an entity known locally as the Watcher, circulated among the few survivors. They claimed it was a guardian of the forest, punishing those who dared disrespect the land. Over the decades, countless hikers and explorers who dared wander near the ruins reported eerie encounters, strange noises, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. My investigation began with interviews of descendants of the original townsfolk, old diaries, and obscure newspaper clippings that pieced together the unsettling timeline of Graywood's fall. According to records, the town's troubles started with the mysterious death of a logger named Amos Fletcher, found torn apart by what was officially ruled a bear attack, but locals believed otherwise. Some said Amos had angered the forest spirit by cutting down a sacred tree. After Amos's death, others vanished without a trace, some found days later, mutilated beyond recognition, others never found at all. Survivors spoke of a creeping darkness in the woods, whispers in an unknown language, and eyes glowing between the trees. The town's leader, desperate to protect his people, called in a spiritual healer, an old woman named Mabel, who was said to commune with the forest's forces. Mabel warned the townsfolk that the forest was alive and vengeful, and that Graywood's prosperity had come at a terrible cost. She performed rituals and sacrifices to appease the Watcher, but her warnings went largely unheeded until it was too late. One fateful night, a great storm swept through the area, and Graywood was consumed by fire and chaos. Many perished, others fled into the wilderness, never to return. What remains of Graywood today are decaying buildings overtaken by vines and trees, rusted tools scattered on the forest floor, and a pervasive silence broken only by the wind and the occasional eerie howl. Visitors report strange phenomena, fleeting shadows darting between the ruins, inexplicable cold spots, and the unmistakable sensation of unseen eyes tracking their every move. One of the most chilling accounts came from a group of hikers who documented their visit to the town. They reported hearing chanting in an ancient tongue, finding strange totems made from bones and branches, and feeling paralyzed with fear as an unseen force pressed down upon them. Their footage captured shadowy figures moving just beyond the tree line and a low growling sound that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. In my own exploration, I felt an oppressive weight in the air, as though the forest was warning me to leave. As dusk fell, the whispers began, soft voices weaving through the trees, begging, warning, or perhaps cursing. The forest seemed alive, the Watcher watching, waiting for those foolish enough to linger. Graywood's story is a haunting reminder of nature's power and the price of disrespecting ancient forces. The ruins stand as a testament to a forgotten community destroyed by secrets buried deep within the Appalachian wild secrets that still hunger for recognition. As I dug deeper into Graywood's past, I uncovered first-hand accounts that painted a vivid and terrifying picture of life during those final days. One such story came from Eleanor, the granddaughter of the town's former blacksmith. According to her family lore, the atmosphere in Graywood had shifted long before the fire children stopped playing outside, and even the animals seemed restless and on edge. Her grandfather often returned home with scratches and bruises, claiming he'd been pushed or grabbed by invisible hands while working in the forest. Eleanor described the Watcher as a presence that could take many forms: a shadow that moved unnaturally fast, a pair of glowing eyes staring from the underbrush, or sometimes just a feeling of pure, cold malice that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. She recounted how the townsfolk tried everything to appease it, leaving offerings at ancient trees, performing midnight rituals, even burning portions of the forest. Nothing worked. One chilling entry from her grandfather's journal, recovered from a family attic, detailed a horrifying night when he and several men went into the woods to confront the Watcher. According to the journal, they heard unnatural growls and saw figures that were not quite human but more than beasts. The men fled as their horses were spooked into panic, but one by one, they disappeared over the following days, claimed by the forest or the Watcher itself. Local lore also spoke of a cursed tree deep within the forest, an ancient oak said to be the Watcher's heart. Cutting or damaging this tree was believed to unleash terrible wrath. Amos Fletcher, the logger whose death started the town's downfall, was said to have chopped into this sacred oak before his death. His body was found near the tree, torn apart in a way that no animal could cause. The spiritual healer. Mabel's interventions became more desperate as the town fell apart. She warned that the forest would consume Greywood unless the people respected the natural order. Some survivors claimed she was last seen venturing into the woods alone during a full moon, chanting prayers to calm the Watcher. She never returned. Over time, Greywood became a ghost town, swallowed by wilderness and myth. Yet, the stories never faded. Even today, hikers and explorers speak of strange sensations near the ruins and seen hands brushing against their skin, whispers carried on the wind, and figures glimpsed just out of clear sight. One paranormal team's investigation recorded inexplicable fluctuations in temperature and electromagnetic fields. Their instruments captured audio of whispering voices speaking in a language no one could understand. Cameras caught flickers of movement too fast or shadowy to be human. When they tried to camp overnight, they reported feeling watched and experiencing overwhelming dread that forced them to abandon the site. My own time at Greywood was marked by increasing unease. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in, shadows twisting and merging in ways that defied logic. I heard footsteps behind me that stopped whenever I turned, and faint chanting rising and falling like the breath of the woods itself. At one point, a sudden gust extinguished my lantern, plunging me into darkness so thick it felt suffocating. In that silence, I sensed eyes upon me, not one, but many. Watching and waiting. The tale of Greywood and the Watcher is a chilling testament to a land where the line between nature and the supernatural blurs. It warns that some places are protected by forces beyond human understanding, and those who disrespect them may pay a terrifying price. The more I investigated, the clearer it became that the Watcher was not merely a legend spun to frighten children, but something very real, an ancient guardian of the Appalachian wilderness, angered by human encroachment and disrespect. Stories from nearby communities told of similar entity spirits bound to the land, punishing those who harmed the forest or ignored its sacred laws. One particularly chilling encounter came from a man named Jacob, a hunter who had grown up hearing the Greywood stories but never believed them. One autumn evening, while hunting near the ruins, Jacob found himself disoriented as the sun set faster than normal and a dense fog crept through the trees. He described hearing footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate, though no one was in sight. Suddenly, a pair of bright amber eyes appeared through the mist, locked on his every movement. Jacob fled, feeling claws rake across his back as he ran, though when he looked, no marks remained. Jacob's experience echoed countless other sights of glowing eyes, sensations of being hunted, and eerie whispers in a language lost to time. Some even claimed the Watcher could manipulate the environment itself, making paths vanish, trees shift, and compasses spin wildly to trap victims inside the cursed forest. In the years since Greywood's abandonment, many have tried to unlock its secrets. Paranormal investigators, historians, thrill-seekers, all drawn by the dark allure of the Watcher legend. Most left shaken, some never returned. The town's ruins serve as a physical reminder of human fragility against forces far older and more powerful than any of us can imagine. As I stood among the collapsed buildings, listening to the wind carrying faint mournful cries through the broken windows, I understood that Greywood was more than a ghost town. It was a battleground or place where nature's wrath and human hubris collided with devastating consequences. The Watcher remains a shadow on the Appalachian landscape, a warning that some places are better left alone, and some secrets are buried for a reason. Those who dare trespass risk more than getting lost. They risk becoming part of the forest's dark legacy, forever watched and forever trapped. Let's move to our 12th story. Nestled deep within the Appalachian wilderness is the abandoned settlement of Cold Hollow, once thriving mining town shrouded in chilling legend and sinister whispers. What remains now is a ghostly landscape of crumbling stone foundations, rusted equipment, and twisted remnants of a community swallowed by both time and terror. Cold Hollow's story is one of greed, betrayal, and a darkness that seemed to seep from the very earth beneath its feet. The town flourished in the late 1800s, when rich veins of coal were discovered beneath the surrounding hills. Miners and their families poured in, building homes, schools, and churches, convinced they had found prosperity. But prosperity came at a cost. Reports of accidents, mysterious illnesses, and disappearances began to surface soon after mining operations intensified. The townsfolk whispered of a cursed, ancient evil, awakened by the relentless digging. Among the miners was a man named Elijah Kane, a foreman known for his ruthless ambition. He pushed the men harder, ignoring warnings of unstable tunnels and strange occurrences deep underground. Legend says Kane made a pact with something dark in exchange for wealth, offering the souls of the workers in return. As the mine grew, so did the shadow looming over Cold Hollow. One of the first incidents that shook the town was the collapse of the eastern shaft, trapping several miners beneath tons of earth. Rescue teams found the bodies, days later, horribly mutilated, others with expressions of pure terror frozen on their faces. Strange symbols were etched into the walls of the tunnels, glowing faintly in the flickering lantern light. A local preacher, Father Matthews, spoke of a malevolent presence stalking the tunnels, something that thrived on fear and death. He warned the townspeople to stop their mining, but Kane dismissed him as a fanatic. The preacher's warnings grew more urgent, until one night he disappeared without a trace, his last sermon echoing in the empty church. As the accidents escalated, families began to leave Cold Hollow, but many vanished during their attempts to escape. Travelers spoke of hearing screams carried by the wind, of shadows moving among the trees, and of ghostly figures blocking roads. Those who dared to stay became increasingly paranoid, locking their doors and whispering prayers in the dark. The mine itself became a place of nightmares. Workers reported hearing voices calling from the depths, cold hands grabbing at their ankles, and glimpses of figures with hollow eyes disappearing into the darkness. Some miners went mad, speaking of the things beneath that watched and waited. One survivor, a young miner named Samuel, recounted his harrowing escape after being trapped for 3 days. He described a cavern filled with unnatural darkness, where whispers begged him to stay and join the others. His escape came only after he clawed through rubble, his skin raw and bleeding, chased by unseen horrors. The town's decline was swift. By the early 1900s, Cold Hollow was deserted, left to rot under a sky heavy with sorrow. The mine was sealed, but locals believe the curse remains, tied to the land and the souls lost beneath it. Explorers who venture into Cold Hollow today report a heavy, oppressive atmosphere, sudden drops in temperature, and feelings of dread that cling to the skin. Some claim to have seen ghostly miners wandering the ruins, their faces pale and eyes empty, forever trapped in the darkness. In recent years, paranormal investigators recorded unexplained noises, metal scraping, distant cries, and eerie chanting echoing through the tunnels. Cameras caught shadowy figures darting through ruins, while EMF meters spiked wildly. One team's equipment even failed completely, as if something was actively interfering. Cold Hollow stands as a chilling reminder of human greed and the unknown terrors lurking beneath the earth. Its story is etched into the Appalachian wilderness, a warning that some darkness should never be disturbed. As I continued to delve into Cold Hollow's grim history, I uncovered haunting first-hand accounts that brought the town's dark legacy into sharp focus. One such story came from Clara, a descendant of one of the mining families, whose great-grandfather narrowly escaped the horrors underground. Clara recounted that her ancestor often spoke of the whispers in the rock, voices that seemed to seep through the stone itself, promising fortune while demanding sacrifice. According to family records, Samuel, the young miner who escaped the mine collapse, never truly recovered from his ordeal. He was plagued by nightmares of the shadowy figures he called the Lost Ones, miners who had vanished into the darkness and now roamed between worlds, trapped by whatever curse clung to the mine. Samuel's journals, filled with frantic scrawls and desperate pleas for forgiveness, spoke of a growing presence that haunted him even above ground. Locals also told tales of eerie lights flickering around the sealed mine entrance, inexplicable, cold spots that would freeze the breath and cause shivers to crawl down the spine. At night the wind carries strange sounds, distant hammering, the echo of picks striking rock, and mournful wails that pierce the stillness. The legend of Elijah Kane loomed large in these stories. He was said to have made a dark pact with a shadowy entity deep within the earth, trading the souls of the miners for untold riches. Some believed Kane had become a vessel for this darkness, cursed to roam the ruins eternally, searching for new victims to replace those lost. Investigations into the old mine uncovered more than just unstable tunnels. Hidden chambers bore cryptic symbols etched into stone walls, symbols matching those described in ancient occult texts. Some theorized that Kane or the miners had unwittingly broken a seal, unleashing something ancient and malevolent from the earth's depths. Paranormal researchers who explored Cold Hollow described experiences that defied explanation. One investigator, Emily, recalled standing near the mine's sealed entrance when a sudden, unnatural chill enveloped her. Her instruments went haywire, and she felt an invisible force pressing against her chest, struggling to push her away. At the same moment, she heard faint chanting in a language she couldn't recognize, growing louder and then fading into silence. Another team captured faint apparitions of miners wandering the ruins, their faces etched with sorrow and fear. In several recordings, distorted voices whispered warnings and pleas for help. One investigator described a moment when a shadow detached itself from the darkness and seemed to reach toward her before vanishing. Cold Hollow's darkness is not confined to the past. Visitors today continue to experience an overwhelming sense of dread, unexplained phenomena, and even physical attacks, bruises, and cold burns with no clear cause. Many leave with their nerves shattered, swearing never to return. The story of Cold Hollow serves as a grim warning about the consequences of greed and the dangers of disturbing forces beyond human comprehension. Beneath the Appalachian soil lies a secret dark enough to consume the souls of the living, and some secrets are meant to stay buried.